Hello and welcome to today's virtual Chelsea Ask a Gardening Advisor session. Today we're talking about perfect plants and giving lots of hints and tips about how to get the best from your plants and your garden. We've got lots of questions from you, so thank you for those. And we have an expert panel with us. My name's Paul Hervey-Brookes. I'm the host for the session. I'm a garden designer and a plantsman. And if I could introduce the rest of the team.
I'm Jenny Bowden and I'm one of the gardening advisors and I'm based at RHS Garden Wisley.
My name's Marcia Peacock. I'm a gardening advisor and I'm based at Wisley too.
I'm Jo Thompson. I'm a garden designer. I was designing the RHS Garden for Friendship for this year's Chelsea, and I also run Colour My Garden.
Brilliant. Well, we've had lots of questions from everybody, and I think we should make a start on them. So our first question comes from Daisy May in Dorset, not Daisy May of the Dolly Parton song, I should say. And she says, hello, I have recently moved and have inherited a lovely wisteria attached to the front of my house. It's large and has sparse flowering this year. As I have never owned a wisteria before, can the team advise on how to prune and care for it? So Jenny, what would you suggest?
Well, it sounds like this wisteria is well established, so you've got a good framework there, which is encouraging. I think the main key is getting the pruning right, and it's one of those plants that needs pruning twice a year. So from now until about sort of July, August, you're going to get loads of whippy growth coming, and it's that growth that you need to just trim back to within about a foot of the framework of the plant. And then in February, you go back to about 3 buds from within the framework. And by then, you should be able to see what is going to be the flower buds, because they're a lot fatter. Well, they're just a bit fatter anyway. So you should be able to make sure that you don't chop those off. And so you're really aiming to build up a kind of pattern of spurs, which are short flowering branches, if you like, short branches, which are going to give you those fabulous flowers. That's the main key to it, really. We've got a lovely web page. If you have a look on our web page on specifically wisteria pruning, and that tells you any extras. With other regards, if it's a well-established wisteria, you won't really need to feed it. There's not a lot of point, because if it's against a wall, all the food is just going to go next to the trunk, and all the useful roots that take up the nutrients will be underneath your drive or your house or your patio. So I really wouldn't bother too much with extra water and extra feed. And other than that, I should think the pruning is going to be the key to success with this wisteria for you.
Brilliant, thank you. Jo, from a designer's point of view, anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, well, I'm really glad that we went through all those technical details, because so many clients say to me, oh, I hear this about 2 buds and 3 buds and whippy growth, but it means nothing to me as a kind of novice. So I would say definitely look on the RHS website and look at the advice, look at illustrations on how to do it. But also from a design point of view, sometimes you go to a house. I've had it with my own house, I have it with clients' house, where you've got this massive old wisteria, and sometimes it's a case of cutting a lot off it and just fingers crossed, hoping for the best. I mean, I had a wisteria here where I live that is east facing, and I didn't think it would do very well, and the previous owner said it never flowered, so I cut it right down to the bottom. I'm not advising this. I cut it down right to the ground level because I just thought it was never going to do anything. And in fact, it's come back, 6 years later, I have got flowers. I'm not recommending you do that, but what I'm saying is a good pruning, they do tend to respond to. And wisterias are lovely, there's nothing, what's more English than a kind of, with the wisteria, that wisteria blooming in town and country, around a front door. Lovely smell. I love that. We had lots of climbing plants in the RHS Garden for Friendship, and they were going to be festooned all over the house facades, just creating that really kind of welcoming, sort of lovely traditional and contemporary look. That's the great thing about wisterias, isn't it? That you can, they look good in any setting, a modern garden, a more romantic garden. They look fabulous, and I definitely recommend using them.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, Julia Swan from Kent says, in the past, my tulip bulbs have not always flowered well the following year. Now they've finished flowering, but what can I do to ensure that they flower well next year? So, Marcia, have you any technical advice on how to keep them flowering year on year?
Okay, I'll just sort of start with the caveat that generally sort of most border cultivars aren't actually expected to flower for particularly well for more than 1 year. So it is possible, certainly in certain growing conditions and with maybe like a little bit of extra food, you can get them performing quite well in subsequent years, but generally they tail off and people just grow them for 1 year, dig them up and compost them. But certainly on a free draining soil, and if it's a a nice sunny site, they can flower again. And what would help that if Julie Swan wanted to leave them in situ, just by sort of feeding them with a high potassium liquid feed. So once they come into leaf, maybe like every fortnight until the leaves die down and go yellow, if she keeps feeding them, that will bulk the bulbs up, with what they need for flowering the following year. You can also sort of go a little bit further to try and ensure good flowering by lifting them, cleaning them off, and then storing them somewhere that's warm and dry and well ventilated, and then planting them out again in autumn. There are also, Julie's already got sort of some, but in years to come, when selecting tulips, she might want to go for sort of the straight species ones. As long as you can sort of replicate the conditions that they would be grown in the wild, they're actually quite reliable to reflower, and they can even sort of self-seed and naturalize in areas.
So that's key. A nice species origin tulip, not cultivated or bred, then you're going to get flower year on year, and they may also spread.
Yes, yeah. And I mean, there are some of the sort of border cultivars that are a little bit more reliable with sort of flowering in subsequent years. So again, we've got a good advice page on how to grow tulips, which lists, I think, about a dozen cultivars that are, will reflower quite reliably. I know there's, one that I particularly like, Angelique is a good one. That's, that's within the right conditions that will reflower. West Point is a nice yellow one that's quite reliable. So it's just getting the conditions right to sort of keep them going. Okay. Oh, deadheading as well. That's a sort of another thing. Sort of they'll generally sort of after flowering, they'll start to set seed. So removing the deadheads, that sort of, just stops the bulb using up energy.
Yeah, okay, perfect, thank you. Jo, now I know you're a woman who loves beautiful flowers and colours, so I'm sure lots of your clients want tulips. What do you suggest they do with them?
Well, I always going back to that caveat, I always recommend, from a design point of view and from colour in your garden for as much of the season as you can, I recommend treating bulbs as annuals. So, well, bulbs, corms. So anything like a tulip, an allium, which is always going to, you've always got that kind of like, oh, will they come back or not? And if you want to, yes, you do have those, you have some like West Point, which are a bit more reliable. But actually, the great thing about tulips is they are relatively cheap compared to other plants. So treat them as annuals, treat them as you would a cosmos seed, and ring the changes. The great thing about tulips is they can bring different colour to the garden every year. So you can have your kind of romantic range one year and bolder range, a bolder kind of colour effect the next year. It's great. It's like, changing your wardrobe a bit. And that's how Colour My Garden was born, that we just wanted to bring these kind of little bespoke colour designs to people's gardens. And I'd say the same for alliums, maybe, not daffodils, but going back to the tulips, keeping it to tulips, I really would say there are so many wonderful ones, but some beautiful kind of at the moment, I've got a particular favourite, which is a kind of, it looks like a sort of rhubarb and custard combination. And I know it's not going to come back the year after, because I've tried it before and it won't, however well I look after it or if I lift it. So the best thing for me to avoid that kind of massive hole in my border where I've just crossed my fingers is to forget that and treat them as annuals.
Right. Perfect, thank you. Okay, so next question is from unnamed, in which case, if we have any more unnamed, I'm just going to give you really ridiculous names. But unnamed says they have a variegated pittosporum, unfortunate, which is about 6 foot high on an east-facing border in a north-facing rear garden. It looks hollow as all the leaves on the tips of the branches, all the leaves that are on the tips of the branches, and it's bare wood behind. What could they do, apart from chop it to the ground, to improve this, please, Marcia?
Well, they just mentioned pittosporum. I'm kind of assuming it would be Pittosporum tenuifolium, which is a sort of more commonly grown one. There's Tabira and Eugenoides, and they're not quite as they're not quite as hardy and vigorous. So, but I'm going to assume it's tenuifolium. They are actually quite forgiving, you can prune them quite hard, out of necessity. I've reduced one by taking about 2/3 off it and it came back okay. Obviously the harder you prune, the more risk there is and the longer it will take to come back nice and bushy. So I would advise, if they were to take, they said it was 6 foot, they want it reduced. If they took, up to 1/3 off, so up to 2 foot off, that would be, and doing it now is actually the perfect time. Any new shoots, by the time they appear, we'll be past all risk of frost. So now's a good time to do it. And I'd say once they've done that this year, to try and keep it bushier and to stop it getting sparse, is to just give it a trim every single year. So just a light trim every May, and then that'll keep it more bushy.
Okay, and as a general rule, would you say that with woody shrubs, cutting 1/3 is a good rule? Any more becomes a bit risky?
Yes, that is, and whether it's 1/3 off the overall height and, from all the outside, or with some shrubs, taking 1/3 of the older stems out, that's another, the fraction 1/3 comes into play quite a lot.
Good, okay, brilliant, thank you. Lorna from East Sussex says, I often read about using mulches on garden borders and wonder what type of mulch is best for general health of a mixed border. So I was going to say, from my own experience, I'm late to mulches, but I tend to use chopped up miscanthus because it doesn't seem to have the same problem of fresh bark where it needs nutrients to compost back down. So I use miscanthus first of all, or well composted bark. And I've recently learned, and I'm just going to ask both advisors if this is true, that if you can get hold of pure salix as a mulch, that actually for borders where there is a little bit of deficiency, the salix works a bit like an aspirin and can give a little bit of a boost to planting. Is that true?
I'm not sure about the science behind that, but yeah, I mean, aspirin was originally, from salix and one other plant. Is it Philopendula? But yeah, that's so potentially it's got extra beneficial things in it, and it very fibrous, so it's gonna rot down and be good.
Brilliant. Okay, so Frank Williams from Surrey says, we have some overgrown hybrid tea roses which need some tender loving care. Can the team run through some basic rose care tasks to get these roses back into good flowering order and vigour? Joe, hybrid teas, what would you do to them?
Well, do you know, I'm a new convert to HTs from being a kind of, from a designery point of view, say, because, they are beautiful roses, don't get me wrong, but, one is taught, I mean, Paul, you might say, so it's the same, you're taught in college that, there is various from a kind of aesthetic point of view. Some roses are more beautiful than others, the old fashioned roses. And when I first moved to my house, I inherited a whole lot of hybrid tea roses, and I didn't know what they were going to do. I could see all these old stems, and when they flowered, I'm so glad I kept them. I chopped them right down. Again, you'll see there's a theme to my gardening, which is, you know what, let's just see. And it did them the world of good. And I've got the most extraordinary colours. They're not, the scent isn't particularly wonderful, but I've got these wonderful colours which I've blended with other roses now. So I've got this one that's a sort of salmony coral colour, but it's looking fabulous with Cecile Brunner, and then a couple of later flowering clematis. And again, you know, we were due to have, just like with the wisteria, due to have the Friendship Garden facades covered with HT roses, because that's what a lot of people have. So I would say definitely give them a chance, give them a go. And obviously the RHS team are going to give more technical advice from that, but I would just say, yes, abandon any preconceptions that you may have.
Thank you. Okay. Marcia, what should they be doing technically to get the best out of it?
Well, I mean, I agree with Joe. They can be pruned very hard, and they respond very well to it. It's kind of, you know, just as a sort of simple thing to remember with hybrid teas, if you remember the number 4, so ideally you want to leave 4 stems and take them down to 4 buds. This would be sort of, you know, ideally sort of February, sometime before mid-March when you're doing the prune. So you are, you know, generally taking them down that low, and given that they can then put on maybe up to 1 metre of growth each year, you're taking a lot off. It's a hard prune. Wow. Because you then expect quite a lot back from them in terms of the growth and the amount that they flower, it is kind to give them a little bit of a feed. So I always like to give a granular feed in spring, ideally just before you mulch. I mean, it's a little bit later than, you know, I'd normally advise, but given that the question has only just come in, I'd say, you know, still go ahead and do that. Again, it's a little bit too late to prune. Sort of mid-March is always my sort of personal cutoff point with roses. But I think given that they've got an old overgrown one, they're wanting to try and sort of regenerate it, I think it would be fairly safe if they kind of went for one of the older woodier stems that's in the middle of the plant and pruned that out now. By pruning out the older stems, you're then encouraging it to make sort of new growth, and it always flowers better on new growth.
Okay, brilliant. Jenny, I'd like to get you in on the chopping action, actually, because if I ask Joe this, I don't think we'll have any herbaceous plants left. But John Franklin from Kent says, could we explain what is meant by the term Chelsea chop? So I thought I would go with a safer pair of hands here with Jenny and ask you what you think.
Well, my plants this year have been in the hands of a rabbit that seems to have got into my garden. So I haven't needed to do their Chelsea chop. But basically, at this time of year, there's a whole group of herbaceous plants that you can cut down to varying degrees in order to either extend flowering or to delay flowering. And examples of plants that you might do would be perhaps sedums, some of the more vigorous herbaceous sedums, achilleas, phlox is another one that responds very well. There's a lot of them. Anthemis tinctoria is another one. Verbena probably, and you can have a bit of an experiment as well. You don't have to chop the whole thing all the way to the bottom. You can have fun with cutting a proportion of stems down so that you get an extended season. Or you can chop the whole thing down, or you could do perhaps the front of the plant and leave the back of the plant. You can enjoy it, but it is quite a nice thing to do because it also means you don't need to stake your plants. And in my garden, things really have to look after themselves. And so things like Achillea coronation gold, for example, or gold plate, those really massive jobs, it can work quite well to do the Chelsea chop on those. So that's the basic principle. Heleniums are another one. The daisy type plants react very well to it. As I say, the rabbits have done it for me this year on the Achilleas, and they've done it to salvias, Salvia nemorosa, which is one of the lovely deep blue, sort of shortish, and I think it's Caradonna actually. And I've not tried that one before on the Chelsea chop. So I'm interested to see what happens with that. Oh, and we've got a really, really good web page on the Chelsea Chop. I know everyone's saying that, and it's not sort of wanting to fob people off to a web page, so we don't have to tell you as much detail. But it is really handy to have a list of those plants, and there are some other references to take other links out to other references for the Chelsea Chop too.
And it's also useful because we've got quite a lot of questions here, so more detail on websites, really good for people who are watching. Okay, so we've got an unnamed, so I'm going to call this person Jeff from Bradley. We don't know if he is Jeff, but it really is helpful if you give us your name and where you are geographically, because it will help with the answers for the rest of the week. But Jeff says, encouraging spring bulbs to flower. I usually do not have flowering issues with common spring bulbs. However, my checkered lilies, so that's fritillaria, and feather hyacinths, which is Plumosum miscari, won't flower. Only the foliage comes up. Both are planted in full sun, and they are surrounded with various daffodils and hyacinths. How can I promote flowering of the checked lilies and the feathered hyacinths? It seems complicated. So, Marcia and Jenny, if we start with Marcia, what would you do in this bulby situation?
Well, it sounds like he's certainly got a lot of bulbs growing nearby together. I don't know sort of how close they are, but I would say possibly with the fritillaria meleagris, so sometimes called the snake skin, you know, the interesting checkered pattern. They generally, sort of one crucial thing to get them to perform well is that they're sort of cool and moist in the summer months. They need that, so they don't want to dry out. So sometimes sort of most border conditions wouldn't be suitable. You know, they do quite well in a, you know, slightly damper meadow. So that could be the reason why they're not flowering. With the Miscari plumosum, I mean, it's a lovely plant. It's sort of, you know, almost like sort of frilly, almost shredded petals. I'm guessing it's possibly just sort of too congested, and maybe sort of come summer he could do with kind of lifting that area, you know, dividing up the bulbs, giving them a bit more space, and discarding any old ones and trying to grow on some of the newer ones.
Brilliant, thank you. Any other thoughts, Jenny?
Well, I'd certainly agree with Marcia about the moisture during the summer season for the snake's head fritillary. You could try feeding. It's debatable how much use feed is to bulbs, because obviously most of their nutrients are inside the bulb. But you can feed from when leaves appear in the spring all the way through to them dying down with a high potash fertilizer. It's kind of a nice thing to do sometimes if your plants are in a little bit of trouble, because it makes you feel like you're doing something, and it may be good, but I don't think enough sort of tests and trials have been done to see how effective it really is. But I think probably splitting them is going to do them a world of good.
And definitely moving the fritillaria somewhere where they're damper in the summer.
Yeah, I would say definitely.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Great, okay. Jackie Mills from Wiltshire says, now you'll like this, she says, or he, could be both. I have a new garden, which is a completely blank canvas, and I'm finding it a bit daunting to know where to start. I've been advised to get trees and shrubs in first to create structure, but I would appreciate some more guidance. The garden wraps around 3 sides of the house with the main part south-facing. So what can you suggest to Jackie as some guidance?
Well, Paul, as a garden designer, you know what I'm going to say. And the first thing is get some garden design help, definitely, because I think the mistake so many people, we've all done it. You move somewhere and you start to do bits and pieces, and then you realize actually if you'd had that bigger picture at the beginning, it would have just been so much easier. And just like you might get someone to help you design a house, even though you kind of know what you want, a garden designer is going to help you design your garden. And designers can give as much or as little interest, as much or as little detail, and you know, sort of in your initial plans as you want. But I would say the first thing as a designer that we look at where the house is facing. We look at the size of the garden, if there's anything beyond the garden that we can borrow. So if there's a wonderful tree that's in a neighbour's garden or a few gardens away, can you somehow incorporate that into your own garden view, which you really can do by some kind of clever blurring of edges. But the very first thing I would do, if you're thinking you're not going to get a garden designer, but please do, is that look at the areas. This is a perfect time of year to start looking at the areas and where you feel you're drawn to. So is the area where you take your cup of coffee in the morning a good area where you could have a little breakfast terrace? And that sounds a bit grand, but it doesn't need to be. It could just be a little table with a couple of cheap bistro chairs or something. That's a nice area to have your cup of tea in the morning. Where do you kind of feel like you're migrating to for lunch? Is that a good area for a lunch terrace? You'll notice it's all about eating and entertaining with me, generally sitting down and eating. And the same goes for the yeah, but the same goes for the evening, doesn't it? It's that same thing. As the sun sets, why think, oh, that's a sunny spot, and why put your vegetable bed just where actually that's where your barbecue and your evening table should go? And I'm not saying, you might not have room for 3 different tables, but where you can move a little light fold up table too. So yeah, I base it all around I design real gardens. So how are you going to use that garden? And another rule of thumb, which I've learned myself the hard way, is look at the very best spot. If you're looking at where to put your vegetable borders, because we're all planting vegetable beds and borders and pots at the moment, if you're looking at planting making one of those, look at the very best spot in your garden, and then don't use that, because that's the spot you need for you, and then you put your vegetables in the second best spot. So that's my little rule of thumb. But definitely going back to the trees and the structure, that's one of the first things you should be looking at, because the trees and the structure are the things that will take the longest to grow. So very much getting that structural layout is important. And I would say, yes, don't shade the evening sun. Look at what you can borrow from your neighbours and get in a designer.
Brilliant. Okay, and I think I'd add to that designers actually in the long run save you money, because you're not going to be buying plants that are likely to die, because we know what plants will suit your garden pretty well. And I think the other rule of thumb that I like to think about is planting plants for winter interest at far points from the house, so that you actually go outside in winter. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So hopefully that's given Jackie some tips, and we are available by email if you want further advice. Reg Taylor from Devon says, I have a Listeria formosa. This is that thing with the funny red flowers, isn't it? Which I don't actually like. That's not what he says. I say I don't like it. But he says it's always flowered well, but after several years, the stems look a bit congested. And I was going to ask Jo, what's the best way to prune it? We already know your answer. Just chop it to the ground. So perhaps, Marcia, rather than Jo's technique, which is obliterate it, what can they do with their congested stems?
Well, I mean, they could thin it out. They could just sort of take out about half of the older stems each year. But it is actually the case. I would probably go for the Jo Thompson style of cutting back on this one as well. They had, I don't know if they still do, but they certainly used to grow it on the mixed borders at Wisley. Obviously sort of very fertile soil, and gets plenty of water. And every year it was just sort of probably about April time, just taken down to 5-10 centimeters from the ground. And it puts on, so much growth. And generally the newer stems flower better and then berry up afterwards. So you can be quite ruthless with it. And you tend to find there's likely to be some little seedlings around anyway. So there'll always be a plan B.
And can I just say, I have got to add to that, please, I can't help, is that I did have one in my garden, because as you know, they self-seed all over the place. Mm-hmm. And it did grow really big, and I did chop it down, and it's now 8 foot again, and it's fabulous.
I think we're going to reinvent the new idea of the Jo Thompson chop as opposed to the chop. Brilliant. Okay, well, we've got another unnamed, so I've decided this is Morag from Perth. And Morag says, please could you advise me how to feed my laurel shrubs, which I've planted, but they've not really grown enough, although there's been a lot of sun and rain. She doesn't say whether they're in containers or open ground. So Jenny, perhaps if we say her laurels are in containers, what should she do to get the best from them?
Well, water, I think, really. Well, they need both. They need water and food. It was a wet spring. The early part of the spring was very wet, incessantly so. But then the rain stopped. And it's that juncture between us getting absolutely sick to death of looking at rain and then suddenly realising that actually it hasn't rained for ages and you've forgotten to water the containers. So I would be checking them pretty much every day, or at least every other day. Put your finger in at about an inch depth, 2.5 centimetres. If it's dry at that point, water really well till the water comes out the bottom of the pot. Then you know it's done. This time of year is a really good time to feed, so you could just mix in some granules into the Gromor. Gromor is a general purpose, but any general purpose fertilizer that's balanced, and you can just put a layer of compost, take the top layer of compost off, mix in the new compost with those granules. Chicken manure pellets would do okay as well, just following the dosage rate on the back of the packet. That saves you doing the liquid fertilizer thing, which is a bit more labor intensive because liquid fertilizers don't last very long. They're only like a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So they give a quick hit, but you want the season, you want the pellets to sort of gradually give out their goodness over time. If they're in the open ground, same thing applies, to be honest. If they've only been in for up to 2 seasons, I would say after 2 seasons you can consider them established. The larger the laurels, the more care they're going to need to get them to that point. And really, I mean, obviously it depends what kind of soil you're on, but 2 to 3 times a week, really give them a good wow. Drench. Obviously if you're on a more moisture retentive soil, not, but keep checking. They love more water than you'll ever know to really get those roots down. After those first 2 seasons, they should look after themselves.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Well, Mrs. Schubert from Kent writes in, well, let's say she wrote in, that she's having a break from helping her husband with his musical career, and now she's pondering what's happening with her herbaceous perennials. She says that in her borders, of which many of the perennials have been there for some years, the clumps are forming a ring of growth with bald areas in the middle, not unlike her husband's hair. That's what she says, not me. And Jo, how can she revive those plants?
Now, I'm not going to say chop them down yet. I know, I am known as Edward Scissorhands in the garden. But I would definitely, they clearly need thinning out, because that's the thing with perennials. And again, you know, Paul will tell you, any garden designer will tell you that a lot of perennials that we put in a few years' time, some of them, it might be 5 years, some 7 years, they will need thinning out, because plants grow, and the happier they are, the more they will grow. And obviously, Mrs. Schubert, your plants are so happy that they've now, you know, they're putting all their energy into growing out. They're growing out. And so what you need to do is, when they finish flowering, and probably, you know, something you can do when the plants are dormant, actually, so later in the year when it's colder, is take them out and split them apart. And different, again, you can look at the RHS website for techniques, the technical way to do it, but generally you're dividing. Some will respond to being divided by forks, some you can slice and be a bit more brutal with them, and some you just need to sort of gently tease apart. And amazing, this is the wonderful thing about plants and gardens, is you get free plants. So one plant will make 5 of those plants, and then plant them. Obviously, again, look at, you know, the RHS will tell you how to do that, but you know, plant them in drifts. Don't necessarily plant them in one big clump. Give them a lot of space so that they have got all that sort of soil and all the nutrients and the light to grow and be full plants. But bear in mind, in a few years' time, you will always be doing that again.
And I guess with plants that you've got that you don't particularly like, you can pop those up and give them to your friends at dinner parties.
Yes, that's so lovely.
I wonder why I don't get any invites. That could be the answer. Okay, so Carol writes in and she says her partner completed his move from Essex to a new joint home in South Yorkshire. So we know that Carol lives in Yorkshire. Carol, I've made up your name because, again, unnamed. And it's much nicer when we know who you are. But anyway, they're in South Yorkshire, and she says he brought with him a 10-year-old avocado grown from seed, dedication. It's now in a huge 2-foot diameter terracotta pot, along with an amaryllis. It's currently occupying space in our greenhouse, destined for tomatoes. Can I successfully repot into a smaller, lighter pot, separating it from its companion amaryllis without damaging the avocado, and importantly, the relationship with the husband or partner? Well, husband to be, let's hope. So, Jenny, what can we do here?
Well, that is a very curious coupling, isn't it? Avocado and amaryllis, all in the same pot.
Amazing.
The good news is that the roots are so different in their appearance that you're going to be able to split them up quite well, I think. They're both really vigorous plants, so I think they'll be happy to be detached from one another. You'd probably want to get on with that now because, as has been suggested, avocados are very, very happy kind of vigorous things, and it'll be desperate to have its very own pot. So knock it out, and I'm not quite sure what technique you're going to use. It depends how long they've been together. 10 years.
Why don't we use the Joe Thompson? Yeah, 10 years. The
wow.
Use the Joe Thompson technique. Just
you might need to use a bread knife. I mean, really, it could be quite dense in there, couldn't it? The rootage. So yes, I would do that now. In terms of compost, I would probably put the amaryllis in, if you can get a John Innes compost with a bit more sort of loam, a bit more oomph in it. I think that would probably do quite well. You might mix it with some multi-purpose as well. Otherwise, multi-purpose is absolutely fine. You could use that also for the avocado. I think the avocado would quite like that organic-y kind of compost in its pot. Avocados are a lot of fun to grow, and they're very rampant. Whether you will actually get avocados, you could do if you live in a warm part of the country. In London, they do actually grow avocados, I believe. So, so if it's very mild, get it outside.
So she's got to be a bit brutal, take on Joe's chop it and go.
Oh, I don't know about chop the avocado.
Well, with the chopping through the roots to get them apart.
Chopping through the roots.
And then we're gonna have 2 successful plants and a long relationship.
Yeah, I think so. I think it'll all go well.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, well, Yvonne Hensman from Exeter says, hello, I have 2 questions. Firstly, I have a huge amount of Omphiopogum nigra. The plants are in various locations from full sun to partial shade. Could you tell me why much of it has turned green, even though it's in different areas of the garden? And secondly, I planted some alliums in a sunny position against a fence last autumn, which I expected to be about 5 feet tall. All my other, less tall alliums are in full flower, but these new ones are 7 foot and there's no signs of flowering. They're just giant stems. What have I done wrong? Well, I think, unless anyone's going to disagree with me, the second part, the allium, it's summer drummer, which is much lower flowering and very tall. But Joe, why is the Omphiopogum various colours, and what do you think about the alliums?
I don't know. Well, the Omphiopogum, I'm not going to pretend, and I could have Googled that yesterday and sort of looked it up and given a sensible answer, but I'm sure this lady can do that yourself. Google the powers of Google, look at the RHS. So I don't know. I don't like Omphiopogum. That's part of my problem. That's why I didn't even bother to look it up. I don't know. Just being honest here. We can all talk about what we like. We've all talked about that, haven't we? I really don't like it. It looks like little weird heads of sort of sprouts of hair coming up out of the ground. But that's my own personal opinion. I think what it is I can't make it look natural and relaxed, and so it's not a plant that I use, but it's obviously missing something. But anyway, I could now make it up, but I'm not going to. As far as the allium is concerned, everybody breathes a sigh of relief. I'm not saying chop it down, so that's good. But regarding the allium, we're all in complete agreement. Summer drummer, which is huge and is taller than me, which I know some people might say, well, that's not very tall, but it's big, 2 meters, something like that. I mean, it's massive, and it spends ages in bud. I mean, ages in bud, and you just think, oh, that's it. But I mean, if buds aren't showing, who knows? But I would say it's that. But I love alliums. There's such a range, as I was saying before. I do treat them as annuals, plant them in a sunny spot, because they don't like getting soggy, do they? They don't like sitting in the wet and the cold. And so, you know, after a year of our British temperatures, British soil conditions, maybe that's possibly enough for them. But I love them all through. Purple sensation, there's a wonderful kind of like purple sensation, Christophii kind of mash up at the moment, which is purple rain. I don't know if anybody's grown it. It's fab, and it's like a sort of small Christophii. It's beautiful, so a bit less vivid violet purple than that purple sensation, but with lovely kind of just manageable heads that look like all these sort of improbable bobbles bobbling across a border.
Marcia, do you think the Omphaeopogon is because in the sunlight it's darker foliage and in the shade it's not getting the sun to make the foliage black?
There could be an element of that, but I've sort of, I don't know, I can't remember the exact name, but I think it's Omphaeopogon planiscarpus nigrescens, the black one. So I'm guessing because the black one is actually a cultivated variety, that it's just reverting back to its natural green species form. And I actually prefer the green one. I think possibly like sort of Joe, the black one can just sort of disappear in the soil. I've seen it looking nice sometimes when it's, you know, got snowdrops coming through it, you know, in late winter, and it's got good foliage combinations. But I think it's just reverting back to the straight species.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. I think we've possibly got time for 2 more questions. Our next question is from Deborah Panoff, and she's in Massachusetts. She says, thank you for the virtual sessions. Phlomis russelliana is a challenge. I'm not sure those 2 sentences go together, but however, she's seen it in shady conditions at Powys Castle in July and in full sun at Scamptons in August. At home in Massachusetts, Quincy, where she lives, 2 miles from the coast, the soil is acidic with lobster compost, manure, some sand mixed in, and on the heavy side. Phlomis bloomed briefly the 5th year after planting in her south-facing full sun border, which completely dries out. She then moved it to a shady north-facing border in front of the house. 5 years on, it's jumped up and looks like it will bloom. How do I encourage the plant to perform? Does it require partial sun and shade? Should she deadhead, importantly? Does she need grittier soil? And why is it taking so long for it to bloom since she moved it? Should she give it a feed? Marcia, quite a lot there.
Yeah, probably like you, I kind of consider most phlomis to be quite easy. As long as they're in a sunny spot and a free draining soil, they generally perform quite well. So I did sort of have a think about why it might not be performing well for her. I thought Massachusetts, they'd probably get very cold winters, but again, the Phlomis russelliana, you know, is hardy down to sort of maybe like -15. So that's not the issue. What she did sort of mention in the question was what she'd added to the soil. So not something I'm familiar with in Surrey, but lobster compost it was, which I had to look into, which is basically a sort of a leftover from the lobster industry, and they just crushed all the kind of, you know, shells of the lobsters. So I'm wondering, that would be very high in calcium, possibly other stuff as well. So I'm actually wondering if possibly her soil is too fertile for Phlomis, and maybe it would be better off in a definitely full sun. I mean, they will flower okay in partial shade. They'll flower better in a sunnier position. So a sunnier position where she hasn't already added quite a lot of sort of soil improvements.
Brilliant. Okay. And one quick last question for Jenny and Joe. Dear garden experts, says Linda Goodby, I purchased a verbena last summer. This year's flowers are disappointing. The tall stems are green up to midway and then brown up to the flower head. Some buds have opened but have died. Plant is positioned in part shade, part sun. What has she done wrong? Well, Jenny, what's she done wrong, first of all?
Well, it would be interesting to know which verbena it is, because mine aren't doing that much at the moment.
Mine aren't in flower at all, but
no, exactly. It's far too early. So I mean, the main ones that are the most popular, I suppose, are verbena bonariensis, which I would tend to cut down, and they'd be sort of extending their growth now, but it's quite a while until they'll actually start flowering. So they're sort of classic herbaceous perennials. I just think it's a bit too early to be flowering. So I'm wondering whether she's looking at last year's growth, maybe. I'm a little bit baffled, to be honest. I don't know what Joe thinks.
Yeah, I was sorry, but I was thinking exactly the same, that it would be good to know what kind of verbena it is, and that is this last year's growth, because again, they can be a bit funny about reappearing, and it's always good to have given them a chop, cut them down like any herbaceous perennial. It could be maybe they had a lack of water. Maybe, I know they tolerate drought, but did they get a bit too dry? It's funny that they're green at the bottom and then they've gone brown, which suggests to me either dry or cold. Is there a cold wind that they're, are they in a cold spot? Is there too much shade? They love a bit of sunshine, definitely. They look amazing in full sun, but I do have them in my garden, which and they do flower in part shade. So who knows? But what I do love about, if it is verbena bonariensis, even if they don't come back, because they don't really like the cold, do they? If they don't come back, the chances are that they'll have scattered their seed and you'll get lots of free plants, which I always keep for myself. I never give them to friends at dinner parties because I like them too much. And they create this kind of fabulous sort of transparent purple haze, which is fabulous to look through. I plant them, I ignore the rules about high at the back and medium in the middle and low growing plants at the front, and I'll have verbena right in the middle, or sometimes at the front of the border, just kind of creating that haze so you have to look through. And the great thing about their colour, the violety lilac, is that it makes the eye recede, so it makes things seem further away. If those little flowers were red, it would jump out at you and make everything feel very near, and your garden feels short. So the trick is with colours, is you can play so many tricks with colours and create magic with colours, and atmospheres and all the rest of it. And I'm getting very designery, I know, but I get quite excited about colour. Is that you can make your garden appear longer by using those blues, those lilacs, those if anybody's looked out at night and seen those sort of moody lilac-y haze, colours of air, almost, the impressionist painters used to call them. It's a wonderful colour to use in the garden.
If this person would like to get some flowers on their verbena so that they can experience these varieties in colour and recession and everything, I would suggest just chopping off the dead bits. It's still early in the season. Cut them off even a little, just into healthy growth, and I'm sure with some extra water, they're going to kick into growth and they're going to flower just a little bit later in the season, so don't worry about it.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Okay, well, I think that's all of our questions we've got time for. Thank you everybody for sending them in. Thank you to our expert advisors, Jenny and Marcia. Thank you very much, Joe Thompson, for joining us. Tomorrow's session is health and well-being for plants and people. So if you've got any questions on gardens that will help with your well-being, with health, any questions about plant health, not only your health, then head to the virtual Chelsea area on the RHS website. Send in your question. Your name and your location are really important to us, and it's just nicer to know who you are. Tomorrow, the advice team are joined by garden designer Matt Keatley, and it will be at 1 o'clock again tomorrow. So thank you for joining us.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.